Let's start with a prayer. Lord Jesus Christ, we ask that you would come and bless us as we study your word, so that through your revelation we would come to know, and through knowledge also come to love even deeper you and your word. We give you thanks that you have had mercy on your church and you preserved her from all temptation and attacks of the evil one. And we pray that you would hasten the day when you visibly return to judge the living and the dead, but also that you would give the grace of repentance to those people who still don't believe in you, so that they could repent and be saved when that day comes. This we pray in Christ in your name. Amen. All right. So, last week we didn't have class. Some of you were so eager that you showed up even then, which is commendable, but not necessary. But then, so we have 3 sessions left with Revelation. Today we will be looking at the fall of Babylon, which is chapters 17 and 18. Next week will be the final judgment, a return of Christ and the final judgment, chapters 19 and 20. And then the final session will be New Jerusalem, New Heavens and Earth, in chapters 21 and 22. So there's actually really big topics coming up still in Revelation class. Today is maybe, in some sense, we're kind of wrapping up Revelation this far now. What we have in this chapter is a culmination of what we already read when we went through the seals and the trumpets and the cups of wrath, God's judgment on unbelieving world. And that, you could say, it's heightened and it's sort of drawn to conclusion in these chapters. So that next time when we go into the return of Christ in chapter 19, that begins the final part of Revelation, which is really the full disclosure of everything, full disclosure of Christ, judgment, a new heaven, a new earth, and all that coming up. So we are kind of now wrapping up this previous parts. Last time we talked about the beasts and the woman, and how in chapter 12 and 13 we have the faithful woman giving birth to a male child who is then taken into heaven, so that the dragon is unable to consume him. And then war broke out in heaven, and dragon was cast down on earth, and there he pursued the children of the woman in order to continue the battle that way. And we have pretty juicy, you could say, opposites throughout the Revelation. And today we kind of ended the last one of them, the opposite cities. I think we can talk about that maybe at the very end of the lecture, about these parallels or opposites we have in the earlier chapters of Revelation. But now indeed we go into chapters 17 and 18, and we now hear something which we already know from previous chapters. Already in Revelation 14:8, we hear the word, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great, she who made all nations drink the wine of the passion of her sexual immorality." So already in the 14th chapter. And then in 16:19, which is one of those cups of wrath, God remembered Babylon the Great to make her drain the cup of wine of the fury of his wrath. In both instances, we already heard this idea of drinking a cup. This metaphor or imagery of drink is used, but it actually is seemingly in opposite ways. In the chapter 14, we hear that Babylon made other nations drink the wine of her immorality. Whereas then in the chapter 16, verse 19 states that God makes Babylon drink the wine of his wrath. So it's both ways. The Babylon is the one who makes others drink, but in the end, she is forced to drink the wrath of God. So drinking serves as an image of both practicing sin and experiencing God's wrath over sin. In this sense, Revelation simply draws from the imagery of the Old Testament language, where sin is often likened into drunkenness and such stupor is also God's punishment over sin. So it's kind of both ways, that sinful life is like drunkenness. And then also God punishes the sinners by forcing them to drink and become even more senseless and even more drunk by that wine. We already mentioned this term some few lessons before, this jus talionis, which is the idea of punishment fitting with the crime, not just in the magnitude, but also in the manner the punishment is executed, is fitting how the crime was committed. So if the crime is drunkenness, then the punishment comes also through drinking, or making the criminal drink. So there's a sort of a imagery here. So it's fitting that obstinate and unrepentant sin, which is likened to shameless drunkenness, is now then receiving its punishment from God in the form of making the drunkard drink the wine of his wrath. So indeed, when we enter these chapters, we already know that Babylon is fallen, or is going to fall. It's been announced as a fact, but then chapters 17 and 18 give a more detailed vision of how that actually takes place. And perhaps before we go into too much talking about it, it's good to just read through the chapters so that we are sort of realize what we're talking about here. So turning into Revelation 17, here goes. The great prostitute and the beast. Then one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and said to me, "Come, I will show you the judgment of the great prostitute who is seated on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed sexual immorality, and with the wine of whose sexual immorality the dwellers on earth have become drunk." And he carried me away in the spirit into a wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was full of blasphemous names, and it had 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and jewels and pearls, holding in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the impurities of her sexual immorality. And on her forehead was written a name of mystery, Babylon the Great, mother of prostitutes and of earth's abominations. And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and blood of the martyrs of Jesus. When I saw her, I marveled greatly. But the angel said to me, "Why do you marvel? I will tell you the mystery of the woman, and of the beast with 7 heads and 10 horns that carries her. The beast that you saw was, and is not, and is about to rise from the bottomless pit, and go to destruction. And the dwellers on earth, whose names have not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, will marvel to see the beast, because it was, and is not, and is to come. This calls for a mind with wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman is seated. There are also 7 kings, 5 of whom have fallen. One is, the other has not yet come. And when he does come, he must remain only a little while. As for the beast that was and is not, it is an 8th, but it belongs to the 7th, and it goes to destruction. And the 10 horns that you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received royal power, but they are to receive authority as kings for 1 hour, together with the beast. These are of one mind, and they hand over their power and authority to the beast. They will make war on the Lamb, and the Lamb will conquer them. For he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and those with him are called and chosen and faithful. And the angel said to me, "The waters that you saw, where the prostitute is seated, are peoples and multitudes and nations and languages. And the 10 horns that you saw, they and the beast will hate the prostitute. They will make her desolate and naked, and devour her flesh, and burn her up with fire. For God has put it into their hearts to carry out his purpose, by being of one mind and handing over their royal power to the beast, until the words of God are fulfilled. And the woman that you saw is the great city that has dominion over the kings of the earth. And then comes the next chapter where it's in poetic expressions, it's described this destruction of the city. Now, already in the chapter 13, we kind of had to ask the question of, which already in some sense came up in the first lecture of this series, of in what sense the Revelation is speaking about the situation immediately when it was written, and in what sense the visions in Revelation are actually pointing to future events. And I think my answer would be both. That Revelation is understandable to the first generation that receives it, but also that there is a message there which does not get exhausted during that first generation, so that the next generation would already look at these as mere history. That there is also a continual message there. So in chapter 13 we talk about the beast, which seems to correspond quite nicely with Emperor Nero or other Roman rulers with their political and religious power. But then we would say that indeed Nero or other emperors, we would say that he is a beast, truly a beast, but not the only beast. So that beastness, if you can call it that, is a larger thing than one particular manifestation of it. And each age and each area sees new ways the socio-political powers of the beast are rallied against God's church. So, sure enough, you can say that Nero was a beast, but he was not the only beast, and after Nero has come countless other beasts, and every generation, in some sense, has to suffer the manifestation of beast in whatever way it comes. So, chapter 17 and 18, with this Babylon, or the great prostitute, pose a similar question, and I would say, at least from me, receive a similar answer. To the first readers of Revelation, the great city described in these chapters certainly seemed like Rome. Peter calls Rome Babylon in his letter, probably following a manner of speech he knew would be understood by the recipients of his letter. At the same time, this drunken harlot continues to exist throughout centuries, always in different forms, persecuting the church always in new ways. So, yes, it is Rome, but it is not only Rome. In one sense, you could say that the harlot in chapters 17 and 18 brings in a new aspect into the two beasts already revealed in chapter 13. Now, this would be economic luxury. In chapter 13, we had two beasts where it could be that the first beast kind of signifies the iron fist, and then this harlot is the silk glove around the fist. And I don't know what the second beast is. So you could say that we have the military might or political power. We have in the second beast something which seems to be a religious power, or something of a nature of religious power, and that could very well be the cult of emperor, the imperial cult that elevated emperors to the status of gods. And then in the drunken harlot we have the luxurious life of the capital city, economic luxury, opulent wealth, and also the decadence that follows from it. So therefore we would have a depiction of Rome from three viewpoints: as a military might, unchallenged ruler of nations, center of imperial cult, turning secular government into an object of worship, and finally the hub of commerce, trade, and wealth, which is also fueled by extortion and brings forth hatred and envy. It's good to know that when Revelation was written, so towards the end of the 1st century. Rome is still living the midday of its power. It's actually still increasing its territory and might. The Pax Romana is very strong and unshakable, the Roman rule in Mediterranean area. And the imperium doesn't have signs of weakness yet. And it certainly is an interesting question to ask and source of much speculation. What really brought the downfall of Rome? I mean, there's a book, The Rise and Fall of Rome, and probably quite a zillion other books with the same idea. And there's different theories about it. But at this point, Rome doesn't seem to be shaking. So it really requires true prophetic sight to prophesy the downfall of Rome at this point of history. The manner in which the great city is finally destroyed is actually corresponding with the way Rome fell, which was that the kings of the earth, that is, the small rulers in the provinces, brought down the capital. The final character who did it was Alaric I, king of the Visigoths, plundered Rome in 410, who learned, like many Germanic leaders before and after him, the weakness of Rome when he was actually serving her. And, we can debate the history, and I'm not really expert in the fall of Rome, but I think one, among others, causes for Rome's downfall was the fact that the defense of the empire gradually shifted from Rome itself to the provincial barbarians and mercenaries, and then its downfall became imminent. So, John is prophesying here that the kings of the earth will turn against the beast or the harlot and bring her down. And that seems to be the way it went with Rome. Now, in another sense, I'm providing you now, I'm not absolutely 100% sure which way we have to go, and not quite sure how we can combine these two. But there is also another viewpoint into the following chapters, where harlot can be seen as a simply different version of the second beast in the chapter 13. So, before I said that we could have like 3 viewpoints into the same thing, the 2 beasts and the harlot. But it's also possible that the prostitute riding on the beast is actually the same beast number 2 from verse 13, who seems to be changing in form, because during the cups of wrath he is called the false prophet, and now is the title of the great prostitute. I think there is a possibility of interpreting this as that way as well. So then we see the Babylon here as a spiritual entity more than a commercial one. And there's many good arguments that actually support this reading, and I will come back to those later. This line of interpretation expands the idea of the second beast, which we would recognize to be sort of like probably like the imperial cult. The second beast would be including now something we could maybe call a pseudo-church, like the false church, or the copy, but not the real thing of the church. There are some elements in the description of the harlot that suggest some connection with God's own church. And we already actually saw that with the beast number 2 in chapter 13. Do you remember the little detail there? When they were describing the visual appearance of beast number 2. Its horns were like the horns of the lamb, but its voice was the dragon's voice. So that is a point where you kind of get this question mark of what does it mean that its horns look like that of lambs. And it might be that there was already there something of that manner. It's hard to imagine that the first readers of Revelation would actively think of a scenario where the persecuted little Christian church turns into a mighty religious organization worshipped by the kings of the earth, and you know, like living in luxury. But on the other hand, it probably would be very hard for them to imagine the downfall of Rome as well. That didn't seem very likely to happen. So, I don't know. There are really things, and we do come to those soon. There are things in description of the harlot which kind of give that feeling that it might be more religious in nature than commercial. But then there are also things which kind of point to the commercial nature of the harlot. So we kind of, I'm sitting on the fence with that one. I guess the tempting answer would be that why can't it be both? Well, I don't know how we would combine them exactly. Maybe there are elements that support both interpretations, and the image of harlot is meant to be a two-layered character where we can find some message of both.
It was 312. Was already the crowning of Rome, the new leader. 312. That's already 100 years in existence. And if the church came in and took over the government by the rule, why would it not have both characters?
Right, but I'm just saying that at that point, when this was written towards, maybe 90, year 90, I'm saying it's very hard for Christians to probably imagine that there could be a Christian church that makes kings and rules the secular realm, because they live as a tiny little persecuted minority.
Was that not already written by Apostle John?
Probably, or if not by John, then around that age as well. Yes. It's not very late.
Well, who dictated it to John?
Well, nobody dictated it to John. John might have dictated it to somebody. What do you mean?
Well, who dictated Revelation to John?
To John? Oh, God.
The Apostle.
Holy Spirit.
Jesus was there. He appeared there.
Yeah.
In Patmos.
Yeah.
So why would he not?
Sure, it's true. That's, of course, it's true. It's true that either scenario is very possible, because, of course, Christ can prophesy the future. I'm just wondering, with the idea that probably the Christians who first received Revelation would have understood what it means. Perhaps they understood it this way. I'm not saying that this is a bad interpretation because of that. I'm just saying it probably was a little bit difficult for them to take, because it's, from their viewpoint, it didn't really seem to make sense. How could that happen? Well, anyhow, I'm just explaining these options, and let's keep them in our pocket as we go forward. So, the fall of the harlot. I'm kind of using I just picked this word somewhere. It's called prostitute. We're videotaping. Is harlot a bad word to use?
No. Hosea, God told him to marry.
I'm just a foreigner who doesn't know the connotations of all the words.
Harlot's a rude word to use.
Huh?
It would be a rude word to use.
It would be a rude word?
Yeah.
Oh.
In Hosea's time, when God told him to marry a harlot?
Okay, well, I'm just, I know I just picked it for some way,
Yeah.
So I'm a Finn. I don't know these words.
It's not exactly a, polite way of implying that somebody's sexually promiscuous.
Well, I don't think there is a polite way in this context, we're talking about her downfall. Okay, let's not get stuck in the words, but there's no improperness meant with that. I'm just using the word I know from my vocabulary. All right, so the beginning of the chapter goes, one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and said to me, "Come, and I will show you the judgment of the great prostitute who is seated on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed sexual immorality, and the wine of whose sexual immorality the dwellers on earth have become drunk." And he carried me away in the spirit into a wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, that was full of blasphemous names, and it had 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet and adorned with golden jewels and pearls, holding in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the impurities of her sexual immorality. And on her forehead was written a name of mystery, Babylon the Great, mother of prostitutes and of earth's abominations. And I saw the woman drunk with blood of the saints, the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. When I saw her, I marveled greatly. So the many waters upon which she is sitting is later explained to mean the multitude of nations, and is also used in the Old Testament when referring to the historic Babylon, which was seated on the river Euphrates. O you who dwell by many waters, rich in treasures, your end has come, the thread of your life is cut, prophesied Jeremiah about that first Babylon. The beast of which the woman rides seems to be clearly the beast from chapter 13, the first beast, also possessing 7 heads and 10 horns. So therefore the woman here is carried by a military or political power unparalleled in its might. The fact that the woman rides the beast shows that here the roles have been reversed and the political beast has been made the servant. So it's interesting that, at least for the time being, the woman is riding the beast, as if the beast is serving her. And she is depicted with signs of wealth, and you could say excess wealth. Gold, jewels, pearls, and especially purple or scarlet clothing. And just a tidbit of information, purple was indeed the most expensive of all colors, since purple dye was made only from seashells living outside Tyre, or found outside Tyre. And there's the character in the Acts, Lydia, the purple, was it trader or maker or seller of purple? So it's really, she was doing big business there. If she was selling purple, it's like selling really, really expensive stuff, because it's so rare. Hence called imperial purple, and for centuries afterwards it was the color of monarchs. Roman emperors were clothed in purple cloaks with gold ornaments, and senators' uniform was a white toga with a purple sash over it. So it was a status symbol. That's if you see monarchs nowadays wearing purple capes in their coronations, that's where it comes from. So she's really a sight to behold. She's full of luxury and brilliance. There's now some points here in the opening verses of chapter 17 which support the idea that the harlot actually represents false Christianity, or some sort of a devilish copy of the real church. And I'm just going to lay them out, and then you can comment or just decide what you think yourself. First of all, this vision takes place in the wilderness. It's said that John is taken in spirit into the wilderness. Now, what do we know about who resides in wilderness before this? The wilderness appeared in chapter 12, when the faithful woman who had given birth escaped, carried by the great wings of the eagle into wilderness, where she will be kept and taken care of. Otherwise, wilderness doesn't really come up as a location in Revelation. So you kind of get the feeling that this might be the same wilderness where we saw the faithful wife being taken. And that's a little bit puzzling, because we read that the woman is supposed to be sitting on many waters, not in the dry desert, but nonetheless there she goes. So is she purposefully trying to occupy the location where the faithful bride of Christ is supposed to be? Well, she has a name on her forehead, just like God's own people have. And this name reveals her true identity, mother of prostitutes and abominations. But it's called, or it's said that this is a name of mystery. So this is not a name which is evident or apparent to everyone. It's a kept secret. She's not openly Babylon or the mother of prostitutes, but rather it's a secret she tries to keep. And thirdly, the woman is depicted to be drunk with sexual immorality. Now, this might be simply a way to describe the lavish, decadent lifestyles of the opulent capital. You know, people are going from parties to parties and sleeping in different bedrooms every night. All right, that might be a picture of how things went in Rome. Probably they weren't as bad, but maybe that's the vision they get. However, throughout the Old Testament, adultery is used as an expression of religious unfaithfulness of God's bride, that is the church in the Old Covenant. And it really is a running theme. We talked about this already when we discussed the Church of Christ as the army of virgins we encountered earlier. And why are they called virgins? It's showing religious purity, not necessarily that they never got married, but it means that they are religiously pure. They are not committing adultery by serving other gods. That's how Old Testament language works. It's adultery in religious sense is always serving other gods. And that's how Ezekiel then, especially Ezekiel 23 speaks about it, that these two adulterous sisters, Israel and Judah, are going after other men, which means basically other gods. And you kind of wonder, it's really pronounced and underlined in this chapter that this woman is adulterous. I mean, she could have many other bad qualities. She might be, dishonest or greedy or spending her money or just like, gluttonous or gossiping. But no, it's one thing the Revelation really brings to the fore. And of course, if you were into gender mainstreaming, you could say that this is an example of patriarchal reading of elevating adultery as the highest crime anybody could do, and therefore, because they didn't figure out anything worse, they just had to depict her as a prostitute. I don't think that's the case. I think it's there for a purpose. And the purpose is that the woman here is depicted as idolatrous, of somebody who worships other gods, who she is not supposed to worship. She is supposed to be faithful, but she's not. So we would see, therefore, in this character of prostitute riding the beast, we would see a devilish counterpart to the faithful woman in chapter 12, who was taken into the wilderness to be kept there. And certainly she will be kept there, but then another thing emerges there that tries to copy her outer appearance, tries to make her look like the actual bride. And this is the harlot of Babylon. Verses 2 and 6 show again a dual or double nature of drunkenness. The harlot makes the nations around her drink the abominations of her wine, so she spreads her adultery, and at the same time she herself becomes drunk with it. The idea that her adultery is of religious rather than physical nature is supported by the fact that verse 6 reveals that the woman is drunk from persecuting Christ's church. So the hatred against Christians is the source of her joy, and it's also that wine which she pours to all the kings of the earth. So she makes herself drunk by persecuting them. That's her greatest pleasure. So there might be some religious nature here. John marveled greatly when he saw her. These words do not simply mean that he was surprised, but actually point to a sense of awe. Even in her drunken stupor, the woman is a sight to behold, both in beauty and majesty. She is a grand vision, an appealing character who draws out marvel in John, even though he knows already what her fate will be. And then, clearly, John's reaction, while being humanly understandable, is not appropriate, as the angel's reprimanding question in verse 7 seems to suggest. Why do you marvel? So it's kind of like the disciples leaving the temple and saying, Lord, what building, what stones. That it draws out sense of awe and marvel from John, even though he knows that this woman is already doomed, that she will be cast down because that judgment has been pronounced. But he cannot help getting that very human reaction. You want to ask or comment anything? Does that seem to make sense to you? The kind of interpretation proposed here.
Well, the Bible says that the enjoyment of sin is for a short season.
Yeah.
The enjoyment of season, of the enjoyment of sin. And why not marvel at the beauty of absolute sin? And this is the danger. Can you imagine how close John was to Jesus?
Yeah.
Even he marveled at this.
Right.
And he was at awe looking at this.
Mm.
Can you imagine the ordinary people
Yeah. Yeah, you
being
can.
taken into a snare easily?
Yeah, it's illustrious.
Absolutely.
It captures your attention and your fascination.
Yeah.
All right, let's go forward then. But the angel said to me, why do you marvel? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast with 7 heads and 10 horns that carries her. The beast that you saw was and is not and is about to rise from the bottomless pit and go to destruction. And the dwellers on earth whose names have not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world will marvel to see the beast, because it was and is not and is to come. This calls for a mind with wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman is seated. They are also 7 kings, 5 of whom have fallen. 1 is, the other has not yet come. And when he does come, he must remain only a little while. As for the beast that was and is not, it is an 8th, but it belongs to the 7, and it goes to destruction. And the 10 horns that you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received royal power, but they are to receive authority as kings for 1 hour, together with the beast. All right. So this is a beast who was and is not and is about to rise. The description is a little bit puzzling, since the beast clearly is visible to John. There he is, he's carrying the harlot, and why does it say that he is not? It has been suggested that this address is meant as a counter to God's name, which comes quite many times in Revelation, as God is the one who is and has been and will be. So maybe the name of the beast would simply underline his inferiority to God, who is. So beast is the one who is not, whereas God is the one who is. Maybe there is that kind of just play with words, of trying to describe beast with that kind of manner. Alternatively, it might be meant to describe the fluctuation of the beast, who throughout human history always emerges, reigns, disappears, but comes back again in another form. So God is characterized by constancy. God was, is, and will be. He's unchangeable. He's constant. Whereas the beast is in constant change. He was, he no longer is, but soon he will be again. So it's like constant coming and going, which again might be a way Revelation points us to understand the nature of the beast, that it is always coming or going or being, and you cannot get fixated on the idea that this one thing is the beast and nothing else, but rather the beast is in motion, and every generation gets their share of beastiness. Verses 9 to 12 then I'll say that poses a chance for endless speculation about these 7 mountains on which the woman is seated. Well, that might be Rome, the city of Rome. 7 hills. Rome was built on 7 hills. Perhaps that's easy to see.
Isn't
But-
it interesting that we have 7 continents on the earth though too, right? So that covers everything.
True. Do we have?
Yeah, we have.
Well, according to some reckonings.
Like Antarctica is considered a continent by some.
Yeah. Europe really is not a continent,
Mhm.
but I guess it
Well,
counts.
it's sort of like the whole 7 sacraments or is Pluto a planet thing. There's no real definition that you can give that's going to give you the answer that you want.
Right. But anyhow, okay, the good point. Nonetheless, 7 continents, 7 mountains, 7 kings. Completion? I don't know. 5 have fallen, 1 is, the other is not yet to come. And when he does come, he must remain only a little while. If you're interested, find a commentary on Revelation and read different ways this has been interpreted. Exegetes have tried to make lists of Roman emperors, like 5 emperors who were, and 1 who is not, and 1 who is to come, and which ones go there, or who are the 10 kings who have not yet received their royal power. And it might be interesting in pursuit if you like history and dynasties and lists of kings and dates, and I will encourage you to do that. I couldn't do it. I just read a commentary about this which proposed already quite many different alternatives of what it could be. And let it suffice maybe for us to say that there are many ways you can try to explain it, and perhaps we just don't know. Perhaps we don't have one clear answer to who these kings were or who they are going to be. Simply we might just say that there will be multiple rulers, not just one. And if one dies, then another one steps in, and so the reign of the beast continues. And maybe that's, at least that is certain, which we can draw from these verses. What is the mystery of the woman and the beast? The angel says, I will reveal you to the mystery of the woman and the beast. And it's kind of interesting. He's promising that he will now reveal a mystery, but we already know the secret name of the woman, the mystery of her name, that she's appearing like a noble woman, but actually she's a prostitute. But that's already revealed. So what is the angel actually revealing? What is the mystery he's revealing? It is the end of these things, I would say. The temporary nature of the woman's glory and the coming downfall of the beast. That is the mystery that the angel must reveal. The people of earth follow the beast, as described already in chapter 13, saying, who is like the beast? The beast appears invincible, and the harlot likewise eternally secure in her glory, and she will never see death or misery. That's her boasting. And it seems like nothing could shake these powers. They are so established and so sturdy. But the mystery is revealed then, when it said that actually all of these come toppling down in a second, when that time comes. It happens like poof. And that's the mystery. And only John receives the eyes to see that. The earth, with human eyes, it's not possible to tell. But verse 8 prophesies is that the beast is actually marching on its way to destruction. Verses 10 and 11 describe the limits God sets concerning the rule of the earthly kings. He must remain only a little while, and the kings of the earth receive authority for 1 hour, together with the beast. So when they receive power, it's always limited. It's just given by God for a little while. Well, these kings then, these are of one mind, and they hand over their power and authority to the beast. They will make war on the Lamb, and the Lamb will conquer them. For he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and those with him are called and chosen and faithful. The beast does not fight against the Lamb as a one single unit. It has 10 kings, and actually countless more, under its power, and a massive worldwide movement rather than one single entity. They wage war against God. No matter where you go, where you are, there is some manifestation of the beast. In this point, the Lamb and his church are equated beautifully. Although already in chapter 12 we see how the child who was born was taken up into heaven so that the dragon could not snatch him, nonetheless the beast, in fighting against the church, is actually fighting against the Lamb. So the church and Christ are equated so strongly. And there is great comfort in Christ's question in Acts 9, when he appears as blinding light to Saul on the way to Damascus. Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? Not, why are you persecuting these poor people, or why are you doing this stuff to these simple Christians who have done nothing to you? Why are you persecuting me? Christ equates himself so completely with his church that when somebody persecutes the church, they persecute the Lamb. And also, of course, the other side of the coin is what we heard last Sunday in the sheep and the goats. Whoever does one good thing for one of these little ones who believe in Christ, he has done it for Christ. And who withholds goodness, withholds it from Christ. So he really thoroughly equates himself with his believers. And in Christ, the powers of evil will meet a power they are incapable of defeating. He is the Lord of lords and King of kings. So even though they wage war against Christ's church, because that's basically what it has to mean. They cannot attack the Lamb directly, but they can attack the children of God, the believers. And when they wage war against the church, nonetheless they meet a power they can conquer. On this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not triumph over it. Let's go forward. And the angel said to me, the waters that you saw, where the prostitute is seated, are peoples and multitudes and nations and languages. And the 10 horns that you saw, they and the beast, will hate the prostitute. They will make her desolate and naked, and devour her flesh, and burn her up with fire. For God has put it into their hearts to carry out his purpose by being of one mind and handing over their royal power to the beast until the words of God are fulfilled. And the woman that you saw is the great city that has dominion over the kings of the earth. And that's really a twist. The harlot is brought down, the great prostitute is destroyed by the beast. This background probably is Ezekiel 23, already mentioned, where adulterous Israel is actually destroyed by those with whom she practiced her immorality. There is certain, I don't know if you can call it irony or something, in the downfall of Babylon, that she was riding the beast, parading, carried by the thing, and then it is exactly that beast which turns against her and tears her to pieces.
Poetic justice.
Poetic justice, indeed.
Some people have speculated that the fall of Rome was partially due to the fact that its borders simply became too large and it was impossible to defend, or that its main source of self-sustenance, that is, providing for itself, especially for the city of Rome, was by conquering other people. And so when they ran out of people to conquer, it was their own downfall.
Yeah, it could be. Again, not being a historian, I can just make, just suggestions and ideas. But it might be that Rome was, in some sense, a sickly society towards the end, or that there was something wrong. Of course, actually, Christianization of the Rome had already begun in 300 and so the Rome that fell was already well on its way to be a Christian Rome. But if you might say that that it was built on a foundation which could not last, and then it came down. So if the harlot is understood as an image of Rome as an economic power, it is fitting image how her own officers, the military power of the first beast, turn against the empire when the barbarians, which were sort of protecting the Rome's borders, decided that it's actually much more lucrative to, make a 180 degrees turn and march different direction for a while. If instead we follow the other line of interpretation, seeing the prostitute as an image of a false church, it makes sense then as well. When you could say that its end comes through the civil government or the secular rulers the church had manipulated. You kind of, even if it's not exactly said here, but you do see this happening, that the church sometimes is tempted and falls into temptation to play the political games. That she gets into politics, and it almost always ends up with secular power winning and the church losing in the end. That just seems to be the case, that she might feel that she is riding the beast, but it might be that the beast was playing her all along. And once she doesn't fulfill his purposes anymore, she can go. Not being too pointing fingers, but one way or another, there might be already something like that taking place. The dramatic decline of apostate churches in Western countries that had for generations have relied on their social status, even sort of the union between the altar and the throne. They are now, when that status is finally eroding, rapidly losing members. You could say even in some sense they are in free falls, both in people, finances, and influence. These are just one instances, but if you go to Europe, it's pretty not pretty, you could say. I mean, you might know better, but how many people did the Church of Scotland lose in the last 50 years or so? I mean,
I haven't heard, but
it's more than half of its
pretty
members have
dramatic, I
gone.
think, yeah.
It's really been dramatic. One generation and you lose like way more than half of your members. And that's nationwide, everywhere in Western countries. Not so much yet in Northern America, but in Europe it's really, churches are turned into libraries, bookshops, and coffee shops because they are kind of nice and good acoustics, but nobody goes to church anymore. In the Church of Sweden, there are places where the people are paid to go to church because there is a like a rule that as long as, I don't know, let's say as long as 5 people show the church on Sunday morning, the local congregation continues to receive funding, so they pay people to go to church. And there was I don't know, anecdotal, but maybe even true story of a traveler who came to the area, went to church, and there were 5 people sitting, and when he sat down, one of the others went out because he was not required to be in church anymore, because there was now enough people anyways. But something like that's happening, and Christianity, or pseudo-Christianity, which becomes attached to worldly splendor and loses faithfulness to Christ, cannot stand, not in a religious sense, but not either in a secular sense. It will lose its value. The church just doesn't go on. Even a pseudo-church, even a fake church, can't go on very long. It will be torn down by the beast. Okay, there's a little bit of prophetic tone there. The next chapter for today, chapter 18, is kind of it's more, you could say, maybe a bit more poetic, and it's describing in detail, in more like descriptive form, the fall of Babylon. After this, I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was made bright with his glory. Now, this angel might be again one of those instances where Christ is depicted as a mighty angel. We talked about those already earlier, so let's not go into it too much detail. Just pointing out that the term "earth was made bright with his glory" is borrowed from Ezekiel 43:2, where God entering his temple is said that he makes the earth bright with his glory. So maybe there is something like that. Also, the word they use for mighty voice is kura. Elsewhere in the Bible is always associated only with God, never with angels. Just a little snack in between. Let's not get stuck there too much. But this is again one of those points where you wonder if actually it is Jesus depicted as an angel. And he called out with a mighty voice, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become a dwelling place for demons, a haunt for every unclean spirit, a haunt for every unclean bird, a haunt for every unclean and detestable beast. For all nations have drunk the wine of the passion of her sexual immorality, and the kings of the earth have committed immorality with her, and the merchants of the earth have grown rich from the power of her luxurious living." The destruction of the Babylon is certainly horrifying. The place of cheerful parties has become a dwelling place for demons and a haunt of evil spirits. There is maybe something again in the way it's described which gives you a little hint that the Babylon the Great was not simply a jolly old place. It was not just Las Vegas of the ancient world where wine was flowing and people had a bit too much good time. It seems there might be a religious element there, a spiritual element, because when Babylon's downfall is said, the first thing is that it becomes a dwelling place of demons, a haunt for every unclean spirit. So it becomes a city of demons. So anyhow, the harlot is brought down, the ruins become shrouded in deep spiritual darkness as well, not just physical downfall. Old Testament backgrounds, you can look this up sometime, Jeremiah 50, Isaiah 13, and especially Isaiah 34, which talk about the downfall of Babylon. Let's just look the Isaiah up. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, there's a... Yeah, no, that's interesting. 34. Yeah, about the Babylon. Wild animals shall meet with hyenas, the wild goat shall cry to his fellow. Indeed, there the night bird settles, and finds for herself a resting place. It's got a mark here, night bird, and then footnote, identity uncertain. Yeah, that's actually interesting. I was reading some other translation, but it's called demons, these night birds. Well, that's another topic for when we have a lay enrichment course on Isaiah. Somebody can explain that. Well, anyhow, Babylon has become a haunted city. Remembering that the power behind all these beasts is ultimately Satan himself, the dragon, it perhaps is proper to say that when the second beast or the herald is destroyed, it is not destroyed in full, in the sense that it is completely vanquished, but rather you could say the cheerful facades are torn down, and the reality that has always been there is revealed. The spiritual power of the second beast is revealed to be demonic, without shroud of pleasantries, at least to those who see it. So that it was always there, but now everything which pleases human eye has been torn down, and there is only any more misery and demonic oppression. And that seems to be the way things are, that it's like there is no religious or spiritual neutrality. Jesus tells the story of when an evil person or evil spirit leaves a man, it walks through the barren places and finally returns, and when it finds the house empty and swept, and then it goes and gets 7 even worse spirits, and then they will dwell there. So when true faith is lacking or has been driven away, we never will get a truly secular society, a truly secular life, or truly life where everything spiritual is absent, but rather there settles demons and unclean spirits, even though their presence is probably hidden from the person himself and others around him, or society. Then I heard another voice from heaven saying, "Come out of her, my people, lest you take part in her sins, lest you share in her plagues. For her sins are heaped high as heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities." This command is directed to God's own people. It's kind of interesting. It's first, in these chapters, first time God says something aloud to his own people. By refusing to take the mark of the beast, that is, by not allowing the satanic values and demands of this world control their thoughts and deeds, the Christians are by necessity forced to leave the company of the harlot. Only way to remain would be by taking part in the sins of the Babylon. So you can't stay in the Babylon without taking part in the life that goes on in the Babylon. The only way you can stay clear of her is to leave. Christians should know that often active participation is not asked, at least not in the beginning when it comes to sin and unfaithful or idolatrous life. Simply passively tagging along is too often enough. Verse 4 is a sobering command for Christians to separate themselves from evil powers so that they wouldn't accidentally become tangled in them. I was reading I'm summarizing it because I can't remember it well enough, but I was just reading an article this week of a pastor in Finland who was just basically writing about humans who, if they are put into that position, they will follow almost any kind of orders and almost any kind of leaders if the situation is right. And it doesn't mean that they are evil or more evil than others, but that just is the human character. Like it was beginning with the question of why did the German soldiers shoot innocent prisoners of war even when they were actually given the option of not shooting, and there would be no punishment for that, somebody else would just take their place in the firing squad. And the answer was that they just adapt, and it's not the problem of them, but it's the problem of all people, that we are adapting kind. And that's maybe a sobering command indeed here, that take, flee, go away, go out. Don't stay where everything around you is directing you to break God's law. That leave that situation, and otherwise you will end up taking part in it. That's the way we are. To take part in her sins. Take part here is expressed by the word koinonia, which elsewhere in Scripture is used to describe spiritual communion between Christ and his church, especially in the sacrament of the altar. So such spiritual communion with the harlot must be avoided. That's the adultery which the Church of Christ must stay clear of. Then comes the words, pay her back, again, speaking to the faithful. Pay her back as she herself has paid back others, and repay her double for her deeds. Mix a double portion for her in the cup she mixed. As she glorified herself and lived in luxury, so give her a like measure of torment and mourning. Since in her heart she says, I sit as a queen, I am no widow, and mourning I shall never see. For this reason her plagues will come in a single day, death and mourning and famine, and she will be burned up with fire. For mighty is the Lord who has judged her. That's interesting passage. Pay her back is told to the Christians. Pay her back as she herself has paid back others. Now, saints don't bring the downfall of Babylon on their own. I mean, it's God's intervention in affairs that brings down Babylon. That's for sure. But maybe you could say that the saints pay back by drawing out and pronouncing the sins of the harlot. They will stand as witnesses, testifying what she has done. On the last day, the believers are actually dealing judgment. And this is, again, one of very peculiar statements, so we don't too often stop to think about this, what Paul writes in 1 Corinthians. Do you not know that the saints will judge the world? So there is something reserved for the Church of God on the final day, at the coming of Christ. That they will not only themselves appear in front of the throne, but they will... It's kind of like, probably, maybe like what Jesus was saying about Capernaum and other towns, that on the last day, Sodom and Gomorrah will rise in judgment against this city. Maybe something, I don't know if that's actually meant, or is it more like a figure of speech, but maybe there is some sort of a thing that there will be a moment of testimony where those who observed the sins of Babylon will stand up in testimony, giving their witness about what happened. I would interpret it to be that way. And then comes a lengthier part of mourning over the Babylon. And this is very similar, you could say, in the prophetic literature from Isaiah and Jeremiah, these long lamentations over the king of Tyrus and Sidon and Babylon and these. And the kings of the earth who committed sexual immorality and lived in luxury with her will weep and wail over her when they see the smoke of her burning. They will stand far off in fear of her torment and say, Alas, alas, you great city, you mighty city Babylon, for in a single hour your judgment has come. And the merchants of the earth weep and mourn for her, since no one buys their cargo anymore. Cargo of gold, silver, jewels, pearls, fine linen, purple cloth, silk, scarlet cloth, all kinds of scented wood, all kinds of articles of ivory, all kinds of articles of costly wood, bronze, iron and marble, cinnamon, spice, incense, myrrh, frankincense, wine, oil, fine flour, wheat, cattle and sheep, horses and chariots, and slaves, that is, human souls. Maybe it's just there to describe the full wealth of Babylon. She was hoarding all of this to her. Maybe the last sentence is also a statement. It's slaves, that is, human souls. That maybe there is a word here against slave trade. The fruit for which your soul longed has gone from you, and all your delicacies and your splendors are lost to you, never to be found again. The merchants of these wares who gained wealth from her will stand far off in fear of her torment, weeping and mourning aloud. Alas, alas, for the great city that was clothed in fine linen, in purple and scarlet, adorned with gold, with jewels and with pearls. For in a single hour all this wealth has been laid waste. And all shipmasters and seafaring men, sailors and all whose trade is on the sea, stood far off and cried out as they saw the smoke of her burning. What city was like the great city? And they threw dust on their heads, and they wept and mourned, crying out, Alas, alas, for the great city where all who had ships at sea grew rich by her wealth. For in a single hour she has been laid waste. Rejoice over her, O heaven, and you saints and apostles and prophets, for God has given judgment for you against her. Then a mighty angel took up a stone like a great millstone and threw it into the sea, saying, So will Babylon the great city be thrown down with violence, and will be found no more. And the sound of harpists and musicians, of flute players and trumpeters will be heard in you no more. And a craftsman of any craft will be found in you no more. And the sound of the mill will be heard in you no more. And the light of a lamp will shine in you no more. And the voice of bridegroom and the bride will be heard in you no more. For your merchants were the great ones of the earth, and all nations were deceived by your sorcery. And in her was found the blood of prophets and of saints, and of all who have been slain on earth. So the conclusion of the chapter 18. It's long, it's poetic. It underlines few things. The wealth was great. The might was great. And it all came down like that. In 1 hour, everything was gone. That's how it's described. In 1 hour, everything was gone. So it's showing the fragility, frailty of such splendor. It might dazzle you, but actually it can all be gone in a single moment. Some will mourn. So the kings turn against the city, but some will still mourn, or at least feel horrified by her downfall. And they all stand apart. That's also something you can say. Nobody rushes in to help her. They all stand and watch, but don't move a finger to help her. The saints in turn are directed to rejoice. Rejoice over her, O heaven, and you saints and apostles and prophets, for God has given judgment for you against her. Now, here we must be clear. It's not proper for Christians to rejoice over the death of a sinner. But Babylon is not a symbol of a sinful person, but it's a symbol of sinful life or sinful lifestyle or world order which rebels against God. That's what is brought down, and that is a cause for rejoice. Not death of a sinner, but destruction of anti-Christian way of life. The verse 21, millstone is thrown into the sea. Now there's one point perhaps you remember from Gospels where Jesus speaks about millstones put into sea. And it's in that instance when he says, if anybody leads astray one of these little ones who believe me, it would be better for him to have a millstone around his neck and thrown into the sea. I don't know, but I think it might be a parallel text with this, that at least it would be very fitting. So rejoicing over Babylon is not vengeful joy, but rather is delight over the fact that God has finally brought to an end a mighty spiritual power that was leading people astray into their eternal damnation. And if that is brought to ruin, that is a cause for joy for Christians, because now she is not leading them into destruction anymore. All right. So now we finished, I could say, the middle part of Revelation. The first part was the introduction, the congregational letters, and then came the long series of visions about the God's judgment on earth and God's own church provided or under his protection, the warfare that goes on between God's church and the satanic powers. And in some sense now we're already looking into the final part. This fall of Babylon serves as a sort of a hinge point, but now we turn into the final judgment coming in the next chapters. I just want to point out, I didn't write these into the lecture notes, but maybe you can just scribble them in the side margins if you think that they are useful. It's interesting how in Revelation Revelation operates with dual images. There are these pairs, these counterparts. We have dragon, and what's the counterpart of dragon? Or we can say dragon and beasts. The counterpart is lamb. And that's the interesting thing, because it's kind of the comparison of dragon versus lamb. We have the let's say it's prostitute. What's the counterpart of prostitute? The faithful bride of Christ, or it's like the woman in chapter 12, which we recognize as the bride of Christ, the church. So we have the prostitute and the faithful bride. And then we have Babylon. What's the counterpart of Babylon? It hasn't come up yet.
New Jerusalem.
New Jerusalem. It's two cities, Babylon and Jerusalem. Two women, prostitute and faithful bride. Two animals, dragon and lamb. And its Revelation kind of beautifully plays with these counterparts. And now we have them all there on the board. And sort of now let's throw them all into the bag and see what happens in chapters 19 and 20 and from that onward. Who stays and who goes and where do they go when they go. That's the pawns are in place and the conclusion of the game takes place. All right, I think I will thank you for your attention now. We can wrap it up here.